Hello, this is Jordan from Loveleigh Loops, and in this video I'm talking about how big to make your flourishes compared to your letters. So here I have the word breathe written out, and then I used my Flourish stamp set to add these flourish shapes to some of the letters. The next step would be tracing over the stamps and combining them with the letters to make it seamless. But before we do that, I just want to show you the effect of changing the size of your flourishes and why I would always recommend that when in doubt, bigger is better. So we have the word breathe written down here again, and I'm going to show you how the word looks different when you make the flourishes bigger. So the first step to using the flourish stamps is always adding a new layer on top of your word. And let's use the same shapes that we did up here, we're just going to make them bigger. So the first shape we used was an ascender because we're using it for this B, and we used shape number 1. For these, with the size of the canvas that I'm using and the size of my lettering, I kept the size of my brush around 30%, but now I'm going to increase it to maybe 60%. And let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to stamp down my flourish near the B, use my transform tool, and shift it over so that it lines up with the letter. And deselect. Now let's do the same for the rest. Add a new layer. Go to my flourish stamps. So the next one here is a T crossbar. Go to that section and use number 1. We'll increase the size again, put it around 60%, and then stamp it down. So for this, I think I want to make this one even bigger. Can resize it here. Can also turn on freeform, and instead of transforming uniformly, you can stretch it. So I kind of want to stretch it this way so it takes up more of the word on top. And we'll worry about the height of the T and the height of this H when we go to trace the final word. And then last, one more layer for the A flourish, which is found in the below section, number 4. Increase the size, and then place the flourish stamp under the A. Move it a little bit, and I think I need to rotate this a tiny bit. I'm going to resize this to make this even just a little larger, and that looks pretty good. So then the next step is going to be tracing the flourish stamps to combine them with the letters so that it looks cohesive. So I'm going to go ahead and group all of these together to keep them in one group, add a new layer on top. Then I'm going to trace over these words to combine them with the flourish. And I'll come back when we get to the end of this word with another little tip. So for this, I'm going to be using the Loveleigh brush, which is found in the lettering set. So I've gotten all of these letters traced. I'm up to my TH here. And you can see that this T crossbar is higher than the original one was. If it was too low, it might run into this E. And so that's why I made it higher. But to compensate for that, I'm gonna have to make this T stem start a little bit higher. So that's all I'm gonna do is just start it higher. And then the other thing that I wanna point out, we've made the loop of the B larger because of the flourish. So it used to be this tall, and now the loop is going up to be that tall. And because of that, I also want to make the loop of the H a little bit taller just so that it ends up being about the same height as the B. Otherwise, it will end up looking too small. So when I trace this H, I'm just going to make it a little taller than I had it before. My T is going to cross all the way through, and then I'll finish tracing this word. I finished tracing these words and I turned off my draft layer, so all we're left with is the final result. So now look at these words and just compare them and see what the overall effect is. Now for me, the first one, these flourishes, they're definitely extensions of the letters. However, because they're so close to the size of the letters themselves, they don't really give you much room to breathe. That's why I chose this word breathe for this demonstration, was because you really want to make sure that your flourishes have room to breathe and that they look intentional. The purpose of a flourish is to extend a letter. So if you are going to do that, you want to do it intentionally and not just make a really small curve or something that could even be confused as a mistake. You really want it to look intentional and make them big enough. So for example, this A, the flourish is only taking up about one letter on either side of it. But for this one, it's taking up more of the bottom of the word. Same with this T. In this example up here, the T crossbar is pretty short. Here, we're actually taking up space across the whole word. So notice that I'm saying that bigger is better and not more is better. If you had a flourish on every single letter, then they would start to run into each other if you made them too big. So it's always less is more, but I think that larger looks better and gives your flourishes more room to breathe. So if you're the type of person that likes numbers, the percentages that I told you before might not exactly work if you're using a different size of lettering or a different size of canvas, but you can actually look at the proportions. So I did use guidelines when I originally wrote the word breathe. I used the medium guide sheets that come with the Flourish stamps. And now let's just look at the proportions. So I'm going to use a different color here to point some things out. In the first one, if you look at the height of the letter, so for example, the letter E or A or this part of the H, the height of the section of letter is called the X height. And here in this guide sheet, it's 1 unit tall. So between two of these horizontal lines, that's 1 space tall. If we look at the size of the flourishes in this example, you can see that this loop up here for the B goes up about 1 space. And then the loop for the A down here goes down about 1 space. So overall, the size of the flourish is about the same size of the letter. If we look at this example, the X height is the same. So for the base word, the size of the letters aren't any different. This E is the same height as the E in the top example up here. But what is different is the size of the flourishes. You can see in this B, it's actually going up 2 spaces above the letter. And then in the A, this flourish is going down 2 spaces below. We also made this H loop bigger, and if you were actually using guide sheets when you were lettering this, it would be easier to see. I would probably make this maybe even a little bit taller just to match the height of the B right there. You can also compare things like the width of the T crossbar that we saw here, but we're also looking at the relative size. So you do want to keep the relative size of your flourishes consistent. For example, if you used this B flourish, you would not want to use this size of A flourish because this one would look much bigger than that. So make them go up about 2 spaces. You could experiment maybe going a little bit higher. Just see what it looks like. And if you have written a word already that you flourished with flourishes that are kind of small, it's really fun to see the effect of changing the size. So you could take the same word, try flourishing it again, but increase the size of your actual flourishes. You might be surprised at how much of a difference it makes to make your flourishes a lot bigger. I wanted to show you one more example just so that you can see another word. Here's the word strength, and the flourishes here are pretty small. And then let's zoom out and go to the other example here. It's the same flourish shapes, they're just bigger. They're about twice as big or even bigger than that compared to these letters. And if you just look at the difference between the two, the bottom one, I think it just looks a lot more impressive. It looks like the flourishes are more intentional and they're used to take up the space around the word, whereas these just look a little bit too small. So if we go back and turn our guidelines on again and just compare the height, we can see here in the first example, again, compared to the X height of the letters, that the flourishes go up about 1 space and down about 1 space. But in this example, compared to the X height, we're going up 2, even a little more than 2, maybe 2.5. The bottom is going down a little bit more than 2 as well. I would recommend staying consistent. I said before, don't use a small flourish up here and then a big one on the bottom. Try to keep them going up and down the same space so that it's equal on the top and the bottom. So if you have been making your flourishes small, maybe it's because you were afraid to make them bigger or you just didn't know how big to make them. Hopefully these flourish stamps are helpful so that you can resize them. You can use the guidelines. And then if you're having trouble with the movement, maybe you've been making them small because you are only comfortable writing at a smaller scale. With iPad lettering, you can try moving your hand around on the screen more to make them bigger, or you could always just zoom out to make it smaller. so that it appears to be smaller when you're tracing it, but actually it will be bigger when you look at the word as a whole. So I hope these tips were helpful. Let us know in the comments what you think about this, and we would love to see your work if you try it.